on Life and Times.
I'm the only person in the world today who studies the effects of media.
Understanding Marshal Mcluhan,
Much of what he said would happen has happened.
the man behind the message.
It was boring. Dad was a geek.
Marshal took absolutely everything seriously.
This circuitry is terribly upsetting.
Hi and welcome. I'm Anne-Marie MacDonald. Tonight we continue our series on trailblazers with one of this country's most innovative thinkers, Marshal Mcluhan. Thanks to Mcluhan, the medium is the message and global village are now part of the modern lexicon. A professor from Winnipeg, his theories about mass media turned him into a media guru. He predicted the internet before there was a name for it. But the private man remained an enigma, reserved, difficult, uncomfortable with the fame he sought. Tonight's show evokes the complexity and the deceptive simplicity of Mcluhan's theories, as irreducible as the man himself.
Being a high intensity, you understand, a hot medium.
What I wouldn't give for a large sock with horse manure in it.
Which he uses essentially
What do you
linear.
do when you get stuck on a movie line with a guy like this behind you?
Wait a minute, why can't I
It's
give my
maddening.
opinion? It's a free country.
He can give you. Do you have to give it so loud? I mean, aren't you ashamed to pontificate like that? And the funny part of it is, Marshal Mcluhan, you don't know anything about Marshal Mcluhan.
Who is the most important Canadian who's ever lived?
A man who has thought more about communication in the 20th century.
Whose name has become part of the language.
With me now is Marshal Mcluhan.
Marshal Mcluhan is the most influential,
word in this
most misunderstood communications expert. His name has become a password into the world of real and pseudo-intellectuals.
When Marshal said the medium is the message, that was an act of high poetry.
So I have to think every time I hear you say a sentence of whether I totally understand it.
There are so many people wanting to explain. Marshal, it's there. Look around.
We swim in Mcluhan's ocean.
Much of what he said would happen or guessed would happen has happened.
Well, he's not just a pop culture figure, no. He's got metaphysical value.
Doctor, do you ever get bothered when people tell you that you're a very brilliant man, but with the next breath they say they don't understand a word you're saying?
My children who have never known my father have grown up with images of him on television constantly. They can go on the internet and find 100,000 references to him with no problem. But they will never know who that guy was.
He came from a long line of bullshitters par excellence. His father was a great storyteller, genial. Everybody loved him, but not a big success, not very aggressive. His mother was a powerful character, a rather forceful woman who felt that she was never appreciated, never had her proper place in the scheme of things. She was somebody who was always dissatisfied, made their home life turbulent constantly. Looked to Marshal, her oldest son, as somebody who could be almost like the chosen vessel of her ambitions and her hopes that she could never quite fulfill. Marshal felt, as a kid, more of a man than his father. His mother turned him into the kind of person almost brittly self-confident because he had been forged to his mother, constant standing up, fighting resistance, knowing that nobody around him was quite his peer. He came to the University of Manitoba as an undergraduate. He was ready for bear. And he finds a bunch of second-rate professors who, after a while, become very intimidated by this kid in the classroom because as soon as classroom's over, they kind of duck out because they don't want Marshal coming up to them and say, well, what about this, that, and the other thing, challenging them. He was besotted with this idea of literature. He wanted to become one of the great, well-read, cultivated men of letters. And of course, the irony was that as soon as he leaves University of Manitoba and goes to Cambridge, he realizes that not just the level of instruction, but the whole approach was something that was outmoded, belonged to a previous era that no longer worked. It made him realize that he was going to have to pull up his socks because this was not Winnipeg. This was where things were happening. People were not necessarily impressed by him the way they were back home. When I talked to his tutor, he said, well, I always thought Mcluhan was a good person of the second order, you know. He suddenly found himself right in the middle of the new critics, the people like I.A. Richards, who were revolutionizing the study of literature. What Richards was trying to do was figure out what is a good poem. So he was trying to train his students to actually reading the text, reading the words, finding how the words worked in combination with each other, the shifting levels of meaning, imagery, and so on. Very technical, very analytical, very formal. So Mcluhan, of course, this is something of a shock because now suddenly you're not talking about somebody's ideas, you're talking about the way the words actually work. And it's the basis of the whole approach to his study of media. Something like television. He's not going to take what we call the content of television. Instead of I Love Lucy, maybe we should have televised Shakespeare plays. He says, no, let's look at the medium itself. In the same way that you look at a poem, you don't try to understand a poem by summarizing the content. You understand it by seeing how the words actually work, the effects that they actually create in the psyche of the reader.
Haiku is Japanese poetry. Ivy on a wall, like wee little animals climbing to their homes.
Well, Marshal, what does this all mean? The media are at the heart of our life because the media work through our senses. And print is a medium. It changed our sense makeup from what it had been in the Middle Ages. And now certainly these other media will do the same.
Look, let's back up just a bit, Marshal.
And I was aware of this figure in white, standing, very slim, standing cynically apart from the other people. Had a little, very, very thin little mustache, chomping on a pipe and looking very superior. I thought, what a strange-looking creature.
When he returned to the U.S. teaching at St. Louis University, early 40s, Mcluhan faced the problem of English professors who are teaching students who are not necessarily interested in literature. Mcluhan always refused to bore himself. So lo and behold, he looks at comic books, he looks at advertising. In his class, instead of boring his students to death and boring himself to death, he decides, look, this is your world, the world of advertisements and magazines and radios. Do you understand it? You don't.
The Batman cult may well be related to the fact that most of the television producers of our time were having their adolescent comic book phase when Batman was a new form.
I began to study popular